I remember President Trump's first term. It was all just about China. 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 It was just line after line of diplomatic and economic attack on China, especially with the trade ban pressures on steel, vehicles, etc., and the Tic-Tac saga. China survived and even managed to push back quite hard on certain fronts. Now, in his second term, superficially, he appears to have moved on to some other matters. But he never forgives, he never forgets. Still, this second term, despite all of the sanctions against Iran and threats at other countries, to dissuade purchase of Iranian oil and products and other business with Tehran, Beijing has continued quietly, stubbornly, and almost obliviously buying off much more substantial quantities of oil, and expanding business and other cooperation with Tehran, without allowing such external pressure to constitute a proper barrier. That policy decision has been a very big boon to Chinese economy, and Trump doesn't like that. So, in his mind, he probably knows I cannot get you militarily to suffer and collapse, because you also possess the great nuclear weapons, and your economy is quite formidable, which I don't like. And I cannot get you through sanctions or tariff threats, as I can so easily get others through. Yet there are still other ways to catch a rat. This war, imposed on Iran, has been brewing for decades, and not only with the US, but also with Israel. America had felt humiliated and driven out of Iran, which it had apparently been overexploiting for decades against interests of the country's own people. Under the government of the Shah, they had once even orchestrated a regime change in Iran, against the people's choice, after a validly elected, legitimate leader had emerged for the country, whom the Americans did not like. So, at the 1979 Islamic Revolution, America felt humiliated when diplomats were held hostage in Iran for 444 days. That became a major geopolitical nightmare in American government psyche. They never forgot. They never forgave. Tranches of ever-worsening forms of sanctions were rolled out against Iran in subsequent years to cause pain, completely hobble the economy and force regime collapse. But they never worked. Instead, regime continued to grow stronger and ever stronger, even when protests and violence were apparently provoked by foreign agents. Authorities were able to beat them back. When their oil exports were terribly sanctioned, they found a way around it. As for Israel, it probably had also been enjoying a boom in relations in those days of American exploitation, with the Western-leaning Shah. So, when the Shah was removed, it, too, would have lost a great deal. Worse, the new administration proved to be no nonsense, and made it quite clear from the outset it was no longer business as usual. And they kept true to that, for 47 years. They proved anti-Zionist, not least as a result of the ill treatment and atrocities meted out by Israel against the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Most Arab countries cowered before Israel, but Iran always remained steadfast in focus and condemnation of extremist Israeli actions, and they remained uncompromising in principle. Add to that the fact that Iran wasn't buckling under US sanctions and Israeli sabotage activities, but was actually moving forward, although appreciably slowly, and modernizing, even to the point of strategic peaceful nuclear technology, with crucial applications in energy and medicine. Iran was not becoming a failed state but indeed emerged as a strategic center around the Middle East, with moral, political, diplomatic, and regional clout. Iran also was developing some very effective strategic defensive technologies, many locally sourced and made, such as the very cheap and effective drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and even some of the most vaunted hypersonic missile systems available today. Israel faced the grim prospect. Iran, a hostile state, but no pushover, like many other states across the Middle East. What could be more threatening for Israel and Israeli expansionism in the region than that? So, for Israel, Iran constituted the ultimate competitor or existential threat which had to be removed entirely from the scene. Otherwise, it could never hope to overrun the Middle East as it had always dreamt of. So, Israel has been sporting to do this attack against Iran for decades. It has always been more about domination and control. much like what America has been parading around the world. And Israel, a newcomer to this, were it to start, and succeed, in the Middle East, it might also begin to extend tentacles of that, much farther across the world. That is the trajectory, and that is more or less the rationale for Israel's behavior, which, incidentally, still comes back to haunt the rest of the world. Israel is not a great power now. Look how it treats the rest of the world. For the US, however, the immediate motive is more varied and complex. First, it would like to avenge, pay back for that perceived Islamic Republic humiliation all those 47 years ago. Second, it would support a strategic ally. In a vicious war, the ally probably would emphatically lose, were it to be allowed to fight one-on-one. Third, with the dominance of Israel in the Middle East, all of it would simply become Washington's back lawn. Fourth, Trump is very much invested in the disruption, even destruction, and control of Iran, as a way to strangulate China economically and more. Despite the sanctions against Iran, China still buys up to 80% of Iran's well-subsidized oil without compunction. Any takeover of Iran could see China lose such proximate, easy and strategic partner and energy source, severely impacting the economy and further growth. And that could merely have been just one step in perhaps a long series, to increasingly commandeer and isolate China from its sources of energy, as we yet saw happen with Venezuela, a China partner, energy source, a BRICS Plus partner and potential member. Fifth, Iran is a BRICS Plus country. Taking over control of Iran could be a ruse at effectively putting a knife into the very heart of BRICS Plus, and effectively reversing Iran's membership. Trump has already made clear his distaste for BRICS Plus and has vowed to tear it apart. Thus, the Iran attack could be much more than just a simple move. For Trump, this might not even be mainly about Iran itself. It could actually be a vengeful lashing out against BRICS Plus, killing many birds just with one stone. And most importantly China, whom he regards as the United States' most strategic competitor and, so, adversary. Unfortunately, most countries around the world and especially Europe seem to be taking this incident relatively lightly, even they who know what it means to cause and fight the world wars, and seem not to be able to connect the dots, and see the pattern in Donald Trump's behavior. They might imagine that this is just a localized affair, having nothing to do with them, or that this may actually be serving their own interests, and they may be all wrong. Except they be comfortable by the time the US has eventually overrun their territories and de facto owned them, and then begins disposing of them individually as they deem fit. Then, the US might, as is already happening now across the United States of America, decide that, no, we don't like the Spaniards. They look too much like the South Americans. Or, we don't like the French. They are too much like the Spaniards. Or are too philosophical and freedom-aligned, and might be an upset risk to the great United States project, and so expel them from the Greater America project. Same for many others within the European community. Only the most appropriate might be allowed into the United States fold or the new American world order. They should not make the mistake to think that this is just a Trump one-off, because usually there is hardly ever such a thing as a Trump one-off. And with a precedent set, it leaves a concrete reality on the ground, a launch pad for any other Trump coming into the White House or other future associated American political expansionist visionaries to spring from. We remember how Trump went around China during his first term and could not get all he wanted. Second term, he decided to leave aside China and start on with the smaller countries. Now, he is effectively coming back full circle for China through Venezuela before, and now through Iran. During his first term, Trump had also brought up interests around Canada and Greenland, but they came to naught. This second term, he has brought both topics back up again. Canada is a very large and much more capable country. So, for his approach, he had ruled out military takeover right from the start, partly to rub the Canadians soft into complacency. By the time he strikes or is ready to strike, that will be another matter, even if it turns out to be not military in nature. By the time America and Trump might have acquired much of the rest of the world's energy and strategic locations, Then he could simply economically squeeze Canada into surrender to the status of America's 51st state. With regard to Greenland, small and Denmark held. Denmark, being a very small and almost militarily inconsequential country, compared to the United States. From the beginning, Trump openly kept the option of military action open, only walking back that tack when he saw the reaction of most other NATO members. He had come with a lot of agenda on his plate. Started with Russia, he had paused. That conflict proved too thick. So he went on to Iran, received a blow and withdrew slightly. He then tried Canada, cajoling and doing all sorts of statements and stunts, and it didn't seem to work. So he left that theater. Next, he came on to Greenland. He did everything he could. He talked soft. He talked negotiation. He talked military force and takeover. He talked economic and trade tariffs until ultimate surrender. He did virtually everything he could. But it did not work. So, he veered down towards Venezuela. Venezuela is a small, weak country, at least militarily. At least he might somewhat restart from there. He didn't go back to Iran directly. The Venezuela incident was supposed to scare Iran into quick submission. But it did not. So, he brought down the terrifying naval armada and military might to bear upon the Gulf region. He has subsequently initiated a devastating attack against Iran, in company with regional ally Israel, in order to bring about a regime change, and cause an absolute weakening of Iran as a major state in the Middle East. War plausibly simultaneously aimed at China. It'd be quite wonderful if anyone could vouch that were Trump to come out evidently successful from his Iranian adventure. He would not begin using leverage of control of much of the world's oil to torment China, and even Europe to give in to Greenland. And when he might have acquired Greenland, that he, bounding Canada from both sides, would not seek to squeeze her in whatever way he might. Trade, sanctions, tariffs, etc., until, reaching breaking point, Canada might simply surrender under the weight of overwhelming pressure. So, if China just decide to sit this one out, they might be making a very big mistake. Even Europe too, if they and many others much more intimately concerned, just decide now to stand aside in the manner of Saul the witness. There is no gainsaying when it will eventually come around to being the day of the jackal. If you enjoy listening to alternative sources and new perspectives to world affairs, don't hesitate to like, subscribe and leave your comments below.